Introduction: The haunting discovery. In the dim silence of a climate-controlled archive, I pull out a dust-covered file box labeled Top Secret, Epidemic Prevention Department. Its contents have been sealed away for decades, the paper brittle and yellowed by time. Inside, I find declassified documents stamped with faded imperial crests and U.S. military insignia. As a modern investigator and documentarian, my heart pounds. I sense I'm about to uncover one of the 20th century's most horrific war crimes, the actions of Japan's notorious Unit 731. These long-lost reports, survivor testimonies, and forgotten photographs will guide me on a journey into the darkest corners of World War II history. What I don't yet know is just how deeply unsettling this journey will become. The suspenseful hook, a whisper from the past. The first document I read feels innocuous at a glance, a 1940s field log from the Imperial Japanese Army's Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department. But as I scan the neat Japanese script, an image slips out, a black and white photo of a compound in Manchuria, China. In the photo, men in lab coats stand in front of a sprawling complex of low buildings behind barbed wire. They look ordinary, almost mundane, yet the label on the back chills me. Unit 731, Pingfang. This was no ordinary medical unit. It was a covert facility where unimaginable human experiments were conducted under the guise of science. The more I read, the more a creeping dread fills me. It's as if the ghosts of Pingfang are reaching out through the evidence, whispering for their story to be told. Unearthing the secrets, documents, and clues. I lay out the artifacts of this investigation on a wooden table. Declassified military memos. One memo to General Douglas MacArthur describes captured Japanese research so valuable that it's deemed incredibly valuable to the United States. Another memo from 1947 bears a shocking decision: to grant immunity to Unit 731's leader in exchange for data. Interrogation transcripts. Typewritten transcripts reveal post-war interrogations. I see references to something called the Khabarovsk trials in 1949, where Soviet prosecutors tried captured Unit 731 staff. The testimonies are matter-of-fact, describing heinous experiments as routine military work. Survivor accounts. Among the papers is a translated testimony of a Japanese veteran, Hideo Shimizu. In August 1945, as a 14-year-old worker at Unit 731, he was ordered to dispose of the remains of prisoners, gathering charred bones from furnaces as the facility was evacuated. Only decades later did he realize he had helped erase evidence of monstrous crimes. His words tremble on the page. "I'm only telling the truth," he insists, despite threats and ostracism. Piece by piece, these clues form a nightmarish puzzle. I feel the investigative tension mounting. Each discovery pulls me further down into a darkness few have dared to explore. Journey to Pingfang, on the outskirts of Harbin in northeastern China, the very ground where Unit 731 once stood. The winter wind cuts through the desolate site. Concrete foundations and a lone brick building remain, silent witnesses to the atrocities committed here. Locals have long called this place Devil's Workshop. Standing among the remnants, I imagine how it appeared in the late 1930s, a secret complex of over 70 buildings spread across 1 square kilometer, guarded by soldiers under strict orders. Officially, it was the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department of the Kwantung Army, a benign title that hid its true purpose. At its height, Unit 731 had about 3,000 personnel, doctors, surgeons, nurses, technicians, all sworn to secrecy. The compound could hold up to 500 to 600 prisoners at a time. Over the years 1938 to 1945, Thousands of men, women, and even children were imprisoned here as live test subjects. None of these prisoners were ever seen leaving alive. Conservative estimates say 3,000 to 5,000 people perished within these walls. Some historians argue the toll was even higher. They came from the ranks of China's civilian population, as well as Korean, Mongolian, Russian, and Allied prisoners of war, anyone the Japanese military deemed expendable. Unit 731 staff referred to these hapless souls as maruta, meaning wooden logs, a cruel code name implying they were mere fodder for experiments and destined for the incinerator. Walking through the grounds, now a museum, I see haunting traces of the past. Steel bars and small concrete cells stand restored for visitors. The Pingfang Museum features replicas of the cages where prisoners were held, each cell outfitted with a small hatch through which an outstretched arm could be injected with unknown substances. One display shows the regime's twisted attention to procedure. To keep experiments scientifically valid, prisoners were given regular meals and care, only to be later subjected to agony. I run my hand along the cold metal of an old autopsy table on display. The surface is scarred. It dawns on me that countless victims met their end on that slab, sacrificed in the name of warfare research. My breath fogs in the frigid air, and for a moment I can almost hear echoes, the clang of a distant gate, hurried footsteps of guards, perhaps a stifled cry. The dark mission of Unit 731. Warfare at any cost. Unit 731's genesis can be traced to the 1930s as Imperial Japan ramped up its war in China. General Shiro Ishii, a bold and ambitious army physician, convinced top brass that Japan needed to develop biological and chemical weapons. Official treaties like the 1925 Geneva Protocol banned such weapons, but Ishii argued that only proved their devastating potential. Under an imperial decree, Unit 731 was established in 1936, cloaked in secrecy. Its true mandate to conduct lethal human experimentation and design biological weapons that could decimate enemy populations. Through declassified Imperial Army files, I learned that Unit 731 was not alone. It served as headquarters of a network of secret units scattered across Asia. Newly uncovered archives reveal sister units in major cities like Nanjing, Unit 1664, and Guangzhou, Unit 8604, all overseen by the same military department in Tokyo. Each unit carried out bacteriological experiments on humans, contributing to Japan's covert biowarfare program. This was a sprawling conspiracy of silence and cruelty hidden under code numbers and false fronts. Inside Unit 731 itself, Ishii and his officers pursued their perverse research with fanatic zeal. Their goal was as strategic as it was sinister: to develop plague bombs, cholera reservoirs, and other biological agents that could win wars without a single gunshot. The documents I found contained clinical descriptions of experiments written in detached scientific prose, but beneath the sterile language lies a litany of horrors. Infectious diseases. Prisoners were deliberately infected with deadly pathogens: plague, cholera, anthrax, typhus, dysentery, to observe the progression of disease and test treatments. I read a report describing how Group 4 subjects were exposed to Y. pestis, plague, via aerosol in a chamber and monitored until death. Some prisoners, running high fevers and delirious from infection, were bound to beds while scientists recorded their dying agonies. Vivisection and surgery. Perhaps the most nightmarish were the vivisections, live dissections. Numerous accounts, including trial testimonies, confirm that Unit 731 doctors performed invasive surgery on conscious prisoners without anesthesia. Victims were cut open to study the effects of disease on organs. Lungs blackened by gangrene, livers swollen with plague, all examined in real time. According to historical witnesses, some prisoners had limbs amputated to study blood loss or organs removed and analyzed, all while they were alive and fully aware. The cold efficiency of these acts defies comprehension. One former medic admitted that after infecting prisoners with diseases like cholera, he was ordered to dissect them alive to see internal lesions. This was done routinely, as if the subjects truly were nothing more than experimental logs. Extreme conditions. Other experiments push the human body to its limits. I find testimony of frostbite experiments. Prisoners were taken outside into the brutal Manchurian winter and forced to endure sub-zero temperatures until their limbs froze solid. Their arms were then doused in hot water or struck with sticks to measure how frostbitten flesh would react and to find the best treatment for Japanese troops' frostbite. The description is bone-chilling, flesh cracking from repeated freeze-thaw cycles, subjects howling in pain. Another report speaks of a pressure chamber, an octagonal steel room where victims were locked inside and air pressure was gradually reduced. Researchers watched through portholes as the prisoners' ears bled and they lost consciousness, all to determine how high-altitude flight might affect pilots. Chemical and weapon testing. The facility also functioned as a grotesque proving ground for new weapons. Prisoners were used as human test dummies for grenades and bombs. Some were tied to stakes at various distances while explosive devices were detonated so scientists could note the shrapnel patterns on human bodies. Flamethrowers were tested on living targets. In one particularly ghastly trial, batches of prisoners were marched to a firing range, then exposed to poison gas in sealed chambers. An observer's log recorded how long it took for each victim, even children, to succumb, essentially timing their convulsions and last breaths. The language used is chillingly impassive. Subject 11, male, age 6. Convulsions ceased at 2 minutes 42 seconds post-exposure. Reading these accounts under the flicker of my desk lamp, I feel a deep unease. This is emotional horror of a profound kind, not the jump scare of fiction, but the existential dread of realizing what humans are capable of doing to each other. I have to pause, rub my eyes, and remind myself to breathe. Every fact I uncover is like a step further down into darkness. Chilling testimonies, voices of the perpetrators. Direct testimonies from those involved bring the horror into sharp personal focus. In my research, I come across interviews and affidavits from former Unit 731 personnel who broke the silence years later. Their words carry the weight of guilt and trauma, painting an emotionally resonant picture of life inside this nightmare facility. One voice stands out: Hideo Shimizu, the man whose account I found earlier. Now in his 90s, Shimizu only recently revealed his story. As a teenage military recruit, he was assigned to Unit 731 in its final months. He recalls being in charge of lab rats, not fully aware of the larger project, but he had suspicions. One day, curious, he peered into a forbidden room, a preserved specimen storage. What he saw would haunt him forever.
The following
Jars
procedures
filled
are to
with
be
human
followed
body
during
parts
all
floating in
interrogation
chemicals.
sessions.
There were
The
organs,
session must be
limbs,
recorded
even a
in
jar
full.
containing a fetus cut from a pregnant victim. Shimizu realized then that the research was in fact torture and murder on an industrial scale. In his testimony, he describes the moment of shocking realization when it dawned on him that we were infecting and dissecting people to conduct germ warfare. When the Soviet Army began its rapid advance in August 1945, Shimizu and others were ordered to help destroy evidence. In his own words, he was tasked to collect and burn the remains of prisoners who had been executed as part of the cover-up. Imagine a 14-year-old boy standing before smoldering pits filled with bones and ash, mechanically scooping charred fragments that once were human lives. He didn't understand at the time, he says softly. Only later did I realize what I had done. The weight of that realization kept him silent for 70 years. When he finally spoke out, returning to China to apologize for his role, he faced hostility back home, online attacks from Japanese nationalists, and even cold distance from some family. Yet Shimizu persists, saying, "I'm only telling the truth." His bravery in exposing this dark past underscores how deeply Japan's wartime guilt was buried and how powerful the need for truth and reconciliation can be. Another chilling account comes from a former army nurse named Toyo Ishii, no relation to Shiro Ishii. In 2006, at age 84, Toyo Ishii confessed that in the final days of the war, she helped bury countless bodies and body parts of Unit 731 victims in Tokyo. As American forces entered Japan after the surrender, she and colleagues were ordered to quickly dispose of jars of specimens and remains to hide evidence. They buried bones, severed limbs, and other ghastly remnants in a hospital courtyard under cover of darkness. Decades later, construction crews in Tokyo would unearth fragments of human bones at the very site she described, lending grim corroboration to her testimony. Hearing her story, I felt a mix of sorrow and anger. Sorrow for this woman who lived with such a secret, and anger at the system that coerced even its nurses into becoming accomplices after the fact. These voices from the past deepen the horror of Unit 731. They reveal that some perpetrators were themselves victims of indoctrination, of fear, of a nationalist fanaticism that demanded absolute obedience. Many went to their graves without ever speaking of what they'd seen or done. Those who have spoken, like Shimizu and Toyo Ishii, often did so late in life, driven by conscience as mortality approached. Their testimonies, though harrowing, are invaluable beams of light, illuminating what would otherwise remain a dark void in history. The scope of the atrocities, beyond the facility. As I dig further, I realize that the evil of Unit 731 extended far beyond the walls of its Pingfang compound. This was not horror confined to secret labs, it spilled out across entire regions of China. One classified report in the files details field test WX2. I read in disbelief as it describes Japanese planes dropping ceramic bombs loaded with plague-infected fleas over Chinese villages. The goal was to start uncontrolled outbreaks of bubonic plague among the Chinese population. Other documents mention contaminating wells and food supplies with cholera and typhoid bacteria, and even distributing poisoned chocolates to children in areas controlled by Chinese resistance fighters. The cruelty was boundless, and the impact devastating. Historical evidence and Chinese records indicate that these biological warfare attacks caused tens of thousands of civilian deaths, perhaps as many as 200,000 by some estimates. Entire villages in Zhejiang and Hunan provinces were ravaged by sudden epidemics during 1940 to 1942, coinciding with Japanese military operations. In one incident, known as the 1940 plague bomb attack on Ningbo, Japanese aircraft released flea bombs that triggered a deadly plague outbreak, recorded in local history and now acknowledged as Unit 731's work. I find myself imagining the scene. A quiet farming village on a summer morning, an unfamiliar aircraft droning overhead, small bombs falling that don't explode. Instead, a black cloud of fleas rising from each shattered shell. In the weeks after, people fall ill with high fevers and grotesque swellings. They die in agony, never knowing that the sickness was deliberately sown. Survivors in neighboring communities would have been terrified and mystified by these outbreaks of devil's pestilence. Only much later did the world learn it was a calculated experiment in germ warfare by Unit 731. One Chinese record, unveiled at a recent symposium, estimated that around 580,000 people in total may have been killed by Imperial Japan's biological weapons and human experimentation programs. That staggering number feels almost unreal. It dwarfs the casualty figures of many conventional battles of World War II. And yet, because these deaths came from disease and secrecy, they remained hidden in the shadows of history for decades. The victims' families often didn't even know why their loved ones died, only that a sudden plague took them. August 1945, the desperate cover-up. As World War II neared its end, Unit 731's leaders grew desperate to hide their crimes. The Soviet Red Army was advancing into Japanese-occupied Manchuria in August 1945.
In a panic, General Ishii ordered Operation Silent Evacuation. According to both Japanese and Soviet sources, the Unit 731 staff worked frantically to erase all evidence. Secret telegrams went out from Ishii, proceed with final cleanup. In those chaotic final days, prisoners were massacred. The remaining 400-plus captives, already used in experiments, were seen as liabilities. Some were lined up and shot, others were herded into chambers and gassed to death, their bodies then doused in gasoline and burned. A witness later described black smoke billowing from the crematoria as the compound tried to literally burn its sins away. Documents were burned. Scientists stuffed years' worth of experiment records, autopsy reports, and photographic evidence into furnaces. Laboratory logbooks were soaked in kerosene and set alight. One report I found mentions Project Maruta files incinerated, 8 August 45, an oblique confirmation that all data on human experiments, the Maruta files, were intentionally destroyed. Facilities demolished. Unit 731 had its own small airfield, barracks, labs, and prison blocks. As the Soviets closed in, soldiers planted explosives throughout the complex. Multiple buildings were blown up to prevent their contents from being examined. The main building, a large square structure, was dynamited, collapsing into rubble. Some of those ruins remain today, solemnly preserved as part of the museum. Escape and disguise. General Ishii gathered his core staff and told them, "We know nothing. Never speak of this." They stripped off their uniforms and donned civilian clothes. Carrying suitcases full of whatever data and samples they could save, Ishii and about 20 top researchers fled by train back to Japan under false identities as the empire crumbled. Lower-level personnel were left to scatter. Many melted into the Manchurian countryside or surrendered to Soviet troops, denying involvement or pretending to be ordinary soldiers.
Shimizu's personal story intersects here. He recalls being swept along with other teenage assistants as they fled Pingfang with the retreating army. He says he saw trucks loaded with equipment and crates roaring away, and in the chaos, one truck overturned, spilling glass containers that shattered on the road, possibly vials of pathogens or specimens. He didn't linger. Survival was the priority. Within days, Soviet forces arrived to find only smoking ruins and charred remains. The Soviets were shocked by what little evidence remained. They found skeletal fragments in the ashes and some partially destroyed documents. Immediately, Soviet intelligence began interviewing local Chinese and any captured Japanese medics. This led to the secret Khabarovsk war crimes trial in December 1949, where 12 captured Unit 731 and Unit 100, another biowar unit, officers were prosecuted. The Soviets gathered testimony of horrified villagers and of unrepentant doctors who admitted, "Yes, we did this for the emperor and for victory." Those 12 men received prison sentences in Siberia. But the world largely brushed off the Khabarovsk trial at the time, dismissing it as possible Soviet propaganda. It took place at the start of the Cold War, and Western powers were skeptical of Soviet motives. Little did they know, the Soviets were exposing a very real atrocity. Aftermath. The Cold War silence. When Japan surrendered in September 1945, the full truth of Unit 731's deeds did not come out. Instead, a chilling silence descended. This was not by accident, but by design. The declassified U.S. memos I found tell a disturbing story of post-war cover-up. General Ishii and many of his top scientists surrendered to U.S. occupation authorities in Japan. American military intelligence quickly realized what they had, a trove of research on germ warfare and human physiology obtained through unethical experiments. With the Cold War looming and a desire to keep this knowledge away from the Soviets, U.S. officials struck a dark bargain. A memo to General MacArthur in 1947 explicitly states that while the experiments were war crimes, the information gained was almost incalculable and incredibly valuable to the United States. Washington decided that prosecuting these men in war crimes tribunals, like the ones punishing Nazi doctors in Nuremberg, might expose the data to the world or push the scientists into the Soviet hands. Thus, in a secret deal, the U.S. granted immunity to General Ishii and dozens of Unit 731 researchers. In exchange, they handed over all their remaining records, reports, and expertise to American scientists. Ishii himself was reportedly paid a stipend by U.S. intelligence for his cooperation. He lived out his life quietly in Japan, never facing trial, and died of throat cancer in 1959, having escaped justice entirely. Many of his subordinates fared similarly. Dr. Masaji Kitano, who had led Unit 731 in its final year, went on to become head of a pharmaceutical company. Others became professors, researchers, or business leaders. In a cruel twist, the very doctors who committed atrocities ended up with prestigious careers, their past erased or kept hidden. The victims of Unit 731 and their families, meanwhile, were left with nothing. No acknowledgments, no compensation, not even validation of their suffering for decades. The files show that the U.S. occupation government in Japan deliberately kept Unit 731 information secret. They classified it at the highest levels, so even the post-war Tokyo war crimes trials, which prosecuted Japanese generals for other atrocities, heard almost nothing about Unit 731. It became a buried secret of WW2, as if those thousands of victims had simply vanished from history. Japan's reluctant reckoning. Within Japan, the subject of Unit 731 became taboo. After the war, most Japanese citizens were kept in the dark about what had happened in Manchuria. The perpetrators, bound by both their own guilt and explicit instructions from superiors, kept silent. And the government, protected by the U.S. deal, never faced an international trial over biological warfare. This led to a strange amnesia. For years, Unit 731 lived on only in rumors and whispers, a ghost story of the war that few could even confirm was real. In the 1980s, things began to change. Brave Japanese journalists and historians, prodded by mounting evidence from China and the Soviet archives, started digging. Under pressure, the Japanese government made a limited admission in 1982. It acknowledged the existence of Unit 731 for the first time. However, officials still refused to confirm that human experimentation had occurred, citing insufficient evidence. This half-truth only fueled survivors' anger. Chinese victims and their descendants persisted in demanding accountability. Years later, in 2002, a group of Chinese plaintiffs brought a lawsuit in Japan seeking an apology and compensation. The Tokyo District Court, in a landmark ruling, formally acknowledged that the Imperial Japanese Army engaged in biological warfare in China during the war. The court specifically cited Unit 731's activities. This was a significant moment, a Japanese legal body affirming that these atrocities did happen. And yet, the court still denied compensation, and the Japanese government still issued no official apology. It was acknowledgement without consequences. As of the mid-2000s, high-ranking officials often downplayed Unit 731 or avoided commenting, not wanting to tarnish Japan's national narrative. Even today, talking about Unit 731 in Japan can be controversial. Shimizu's experience is telling. When he spoke out about what he witnessed, he met not only support from peace activists, but also harsh backlash. Online trolls called him a traitor. Some denied his story, labeling it Chinese propaganda. A deep strain of nationalist denial persists, where admitting to such war crimes is seen by some as unpatriotic. But truth has a way of emerging, slowly but surely. Japanese scholars like Katsuo Nishiyama fought to unearth evidence. In 2018, Professor Nishiyama's efforts led to the National Archives of Japan releasing a list of over 3,600 names of Unit 731 personnel. This disclosure was groundbreaking. It put real names and identities to the once anonymous perpetrators, reinforcing that Unit 731 was not a myth but a very real organization of real people. The list is important evidence that supports testimony by those involved, Nishiyama said, a major step toward unveiling concealed facts. China, for its part, never forgot. The Chinese government and historians have meticulously collected evidence over the years, from wartime records to survivor interviews, ensuring the world cannot easily forget this chapter. In Harbin, the site of Unit 731's headquarters has been turned into the Museum of Evidence of War Crimes by Unit 731, which opened in 2015. There, exhibits display everything from dioramas of experiments to the very test tubes and instruments used by Unit 731's doctors. I saw photos of the museum's Room 9, which contains a glass case of original tools, long serrated saws for amputations, rows of surgical knives, thick leather straps that once restrained victims, and even a set of metal hooks said to have been used to hang bodies or parts for examination. It is a gruesome display, but its purpose is education and remembrance. As the museum's curators often say, these artifacts are exhibited so that such horrors won't soon be forgotten, and crucially, so they won't be repeated. Standing in that museum myself, I feel a heavy solemnity. Chinese families walk quietly through the halls, some wiping tears. Photographs of victims, anonymous Chinese civilians who died in agony, line a memorial wall. I realize that for the people here, this isn't just history, it's personal. Many northeastern Chinese have relatives or hometown stories scarred by Unit 731's terror. For them, the silence after the war was an open wound. Now, at least, there is a place and a narrative to acknowledge their suffering. Reflection. Humanity in the aftermath. As my investigation nears its end, I spend an evening poring over my notes in the hotel in Harbin. I feel an overwhelming mix of emotions: horror at what happened, sorrow for the victims, anger at the cover-ups, and admiration for those who bravely seek the truth even today. I think of the victims, the thousands of men, women, and children who were treated as less than human and died namelessly, their bodies burned or buried in secret. Most of their identities remain unknown to this day. They were farmers, villagers, prisoners of war, ordinary people whose lives were stolen for a twisted cause. What would it have felt like to be one of them? Perhaps captured by the Kempeitai military police on suspicion of being anti-Japanese, shipped to a remote compound with no explanation, then subjected to increasing torments, an injection one day, a blood draw the next, strange illnesses, cruel exams by men in lab coats who wouldn't even meet your eyes, and finally the realization that there was no way out alive. It's a descent into despair that I can hardly bear to imagine. In the archives, I came across one rare fragment of a prisoner's voice, a Chinese man who somehow kept a hidden diary, most likely a scrap of paper later found on his body or in the cell. In rough pencil scrawl, he wrote, "I dream of my wife. I hear our baby crying. Why is this happening? I only pray to see them again in heaven." The diary ended abruptly. He did not survive. That scrap now resides in a Chinese exhibition, a poignant testament to the human cost behind the statistics. Legacy and lessons. Unit 731's legacy is a dark stain, but it holds lessons for the world. It forces us to confront the depths of cruelty that can be reached when war, secrecy, and dehumanization collide. This story also raises difficult questions. How could educated doctors and scientists violate the Hippocratic Oath so profoundly? Many of Unit 731's staff were top graduates from Japan's best medical schools. Yet, indoctrinated with militarism and racism, they came to view their captives not as fellow humans, but as experimental material. It's a sobering example of how normal people can be led to commit evil under certain conditions, a phenomenon as relevant as ever. This investigation also underscores the moral compromises nations make. The United States, in its eagerness for scientific gain and Cold War advantage, chose expedience over justice by shielding war criminals. The justification was national security, but the moral cost was high.
It denied closure and recognition to victims, and arguably it denied the Japanese public a full reckoning with their army's actions. When truths are buried for too long, they fester. In Japan, the lack of early accountability meant generations grew up unaware of this history, making the eventual revelations more jarring and contentious. On a hopeful note, I see that in recent years, more voices in Japan have begun to speak openly about Unit 731. Documentaries, books like Factories of Death, and even testimonies aired on NHK, Japan's public broadcaster, have started to educate people about what happened. Young Japanese activists have joined Chinese and Korean groups in memorial services. There is a slow but growing consensus that these crimes must be acknowledged as part of history, no matter how shameful, to ensure they never happen again. The haunting conclusion: secrets that linger. After weeks of piecing together this grim puzzle, I find myself back where I started, in the archives reading room, long after midnight. The fluorescent lights hum quietly. I have one last file open before me, a compilation of recently declassified intelligence reports from the late 1940s and 50s. Many lines are still redacted, black bars hiding names and details, even now. I wonder what secrets still lie hidden. One page catches my eye. It's a 1956 CIA report speculating that some Unit 731 veterans might have been recruited by the Soviet Union to aid its own bioweapons program. A marginal note reads, "Full extent of Unit 731 activities may never be known." That, I realize, might be the ultimate chilling fact. Even after all this investigation, the full truth of Unit 731 remains elusive. So much evidence was destroyed at war's end. So many participants took their knowledge to the grave. There are persistent rumors, perhaps more urban legend than fact, that Ishii hid away microfilms of his research, or that caches of documents still lie buried in Harbin or Tokyo. In 1993, construction workers in Harbin did uncover thousands of bottles and containers buried near the Unit 731 site, some still containing unknown chemicals and cultures. Could there even be mass graves yet unfound? The thought sends a shiver down my spine. I gather my notes and exit the archive. The night air is cold and still. In my mind's eye, I see the compound of Unit 731 as it once was, floodlights cutting through the darkness, trucks coming and going at odd hours, the distant wail of a victim carried on the wind. Those sounds are gone now, but the echoes remain. The ghosts of Pingfang will never completely rest, not until every fragment of their story is laid bare. This has been a journey into true, real-life horror, the kind that leaves a permanent mark on one's soul. I set out to reveal the dark truth of Unit 731, and in doing so, I've faced the capacity for evil within human history. But I've also witnessed courage, the courage of survivors speaking out, of researchers insisting that the world remember. In the end, perhaps that is what redeems this tale. From the depths of atrocity, we see glimmers of humanity, in the remorse of a 94-year-old man seeking forgiveness, in the dedication of historians who refuse to let truth stay buried, and in the solidarity of people across nations commemorating the victims. As I close my files, I cannot help but ask one final haunting question. Has the full truth of Unit 731 been revealed, or do more dark secrets lie waiting for someone years from now to discover? The story feels